start with, as I say, I would first have to get control of the federal government, which means you'd have to essentially seize control of all the leadership of these agencies, especially the national security agencies, and make sure you were running them and knew what they'd been doing. Again, I don't think the president has any effective control over these agencies, and even if he did, it probably wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing. Secondly, you notice one thing that Trump has not done is, whatever he thinks he's doing with these tariffs and so on and so forth, he doesn't explain anything to anybody. He just sort of says, "Oh, let's just raise the tariffs, and I guess domestic manufacturing will come back like just mushrooms after the rain automatically." Doesn't work that way. What I would do is go on national TV, internet, everything else, social media, and propose a well thought out program for restructuring the American government away from foreign adventurism, pull out of NATO, pull out of all of our foreign alliances, cut a deal. Some people say Trump wants to do that, but he's not going to. Cut a deal with the Russians and the Chinese and maybe other powers, saying we have no interest in this part of the world. That's your problem over there. In the Pacific, pull back past the second or third island chain and concede everything west of that to the Chinese. Do something similar in Eastern Europe. Cut the defense budget, military budget way down, at least by half, maybe 2/3, maybe down 90%, like you say. Concentrate solely on the territorial defense of the United States.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 317. I'm talking to Jim Jatras, and I'm also trying this out on a new laptop, so we'll see how that works out. How are you, Jim?
Could be worse, and it will be.
Yeah, Jim was on a few months ago, and we talked about some of the issues that might befall Trump in his attempt to cut the government. And Jim was involved. You were involved with the Grace Commission, and this was back in the early 80s of Ronald Reagan.
Well, I wasn't involved with the Grace Commission. I was aware of it. I was at the State Department and later at the U.S. Senate, but I was aware of the Grace Commission.
Yeah. Were you working in somebody's Senate office, or?
I was working in the Republican leadership, what's called the Republican Policy Committee. So each party in the Senate has its own leadership structures, and the Policy Committee is one of those.
Oh, okay. So well, and Jim was so Jim's on the inside, and he certainly knows how these things worked. And we're going to talk about what's been going on with the Doge and other things like that. The what seems to be possibly the end of Doge. I don't know if the Department of Government Efficiency, as it was called, I don't know if anything's going to get better, but from here on. But I don't know if we're going to get the government cuts that some people were hoping we'd get. So what do you think about all this, Jim?
Well, I mean, to start with, the whole notion that the government can be made more efficient, can run on the same basis as a private business. And that was also what was behind the Grace Commission back in the 1980s. I think it's just a flawed concept to start with. I mean, the government is not a private business. The government does not have a product or a service that they sell to voluntary purchasers in the same way that a private business does. And in fact, if you look at the way the traffic tends to run, it's businesses that tend to take on the same kind of bureaucratic culture that you tend to find in the government, where their activities are not always directly related to making a profit and selling a good product or whatever the thing might be. So the idea that you're going to come in and we're going to, just cut the dead wood and the fat and have the government work on a lean, mean, sleek basis, I think just is a fake concept to start with. I mean, governments just don't work that way. The bigger problem, though, is that virtually everything the government does is authorized by statute. Now, they may exceed their statutory authority, but it doesn't work the other way around. You can't cut them back very easily just by executive action, even though the executive branch is, according to the Constitution. I remember back when we theoretically had one of those. A constitution. That would be a great idea. Anyway, back when we had a constitution, it says that the executive power of the United States is vested in a president of the United States. He is the executive branch, and everybody else, what they call inferior executive officials, are his servants, according to the Constitution. That's not the way it works anymore either. You have this huge federal bureaucracy, which is created by statute, and then they basically are conducting activities with the power of law, even though Congress is no longer going back to reauthorize what they're doing. So, like, for example, all the thousands and thousands of regulations that are issued by federal agencies have the effect of law for the rest of the country. And there's really nothing anybody can do about it unless Congress repeals those laws and closes those agencies. So somebody like Doge can come in and thrash around. They got the young fellows with their backpacks and thinking they're making, sharp judgments about how the way things are supposed to go, and then fire employees who can be fired as opposed to employees that it's very hard to fire. Is that actually going to make much of a difference? No, I think they're just going to make a little dent in it, and the dent won't necessarily be an improvement. So that's where we are.
That seems to be where we are, yes. I mean, it's, you end up with, as you correctly pointed out, a lot of these laws are basically made in the executive branch, and
Mhm.
there's really without any congressional oversight at all. I don't know how long it's been that way. And the other thing, unfortunately, Jim, as you pointed out, much of American business, especially the large
Mhm.
corporations, they do operate more like the government. I don't know. What do you think causes? I mean, I certainly see lots of American businesses where you have all these people who just push papers and go to meetings and don't do anything else.
Exactly. Well, look, and I think this is where a lot of libertarians become victims of their own ideology, where they say, public sector government, that's bad. Private sector business, that's good. And private property is great. Public property is not so great. The trouble is, the natural tendency of economic power is to acquire political power. So if you have big corporations, and let's remember, corporations are themselves creatures of the state. They're only legal persons because legislation is passed to make them legal persons. Once they acquire a certain amount of power, then their natural tendency is to take over what they call state capture, the elements of the government that are supposedly regulating and policing their activities, but instead are conducting their business in a way that will benefit the very same corporations. Who runs the FDA? Well, obviously the pharmaceutical and the other companies that have business in front of the FDA. Who runs the Department of Energy? Obviously, the big energy companies. And you go down the list. Who runs the Defense Department? All the big military contractors. I mean, again, I've got a personally positive attitude toward Elon Musk generally, as oligarchs go. I don't think he's the worst. He's my favorite African American. But the fact, is who does more business with the U.S. government than Elon Musk does? So the idea is that he's going to come in and radically change things. I think is highly unlikely. I think what he said about this big, beautiful spending bill that Trump wants passed is correct. So who's Trump targeting? Thomas Massey, because he's actually against the bill, which actually is going to explode the deficit even more than what we have now. So look, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry to run on like this a little bit, Chris, but I mean, uh, I think we're looking at, if you will, structural, long-standing corruptions of a system that long since has lost any contour of what it originally was designed to do, and it can't be fixed. Heracles could clean out the Augean stables. Elon Musk is not going to clear out these.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I have some respect for Musk too, but it is forgotten that he's really a major corporate welfare statist, and a major beneficiary of corporate welfare. Although I appreciate that he's opposed to all the woke stuff, because I think he saw how it
Yeah.
destroyed South Africa. But it's so, uh, yeah, there's this whole bureaucracy, and in some cases, I'm afraid Trump is also kind of promoting it in some ways, especially with his relationship with Teal and Palantir. I think he wants to
Yeah. Wow.
put up
Yeah.
this major surveillance state, and yeah, I have a feeling Teal is behind a lot of this stuff, and Teal manages to be behind stuff, but I don't think it's obvious to I there's you don't really pay he's not really doing anything to make waves, so people are just kinda not are ignoring him, but I think he's in the background a lot of this stuff, which is
Yeah, I mean, Musk was much more out front and, visible with his activities, and Teal, I think, wisely in his case, stays in the shadows, and, but also is you know, getting a huge amount of power. Of course, the other thing people worry about, who is, Peter Thiel's number 1, political, protege?
JD Vance.
Yeah, yeah. So, look, and again, I'm not gonna, you know who Whitney Webb is. She does an awful lot of good
Oh,
research on
yes.
and all that, and I think very highly of her. Not every connection is necessarily a control mechanism or a part of a conspiracy or something like that, but those connections do exist, and you can't just sort of wave them away and say, "Oh, well, none of that matters." I think it probably does matter. How it matters, where it matters, what direction it's gonna go, I think is open to interpretation or speculation, but to say, "Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain," I don't think I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, well, you realize eventually, that maybe they don't just like each other because they like to play golf with each other, but,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's one thing I often find interesting when people criticize Trump for playing golf, and it's like, "Look, this is how guys make deals." You know? 2 CEOs get together, they go out and play a round of golf, and then they go back to their offices and they say, "Okay, we're done."
Well
They make deals while they discuss deals and stuff while they play golf. That's just how a lot of guys operate, you
well,
know?
I remember back in the 1950s that the, John Birch Society alleged that President Eisenhower was, one of the insiders, that he was an agent of the international communist movement, and I think it was William Buckley who said, "Ike's not a communist, he's a golfer." And which is about as close to an ideology as I think President Eisenhower had. Now Trump is also a golfer. I just saw he was out on the links with, I guess that's what they call it because 'cause I'm not a golfer. He was out on the links with the, uh, eith whoever the leaders, the president or prime minister of, Finland, Stubb, who was out there, making a lot of noise about militarizing the Nordic region. We're gonna be building a bunch of bases up there. And who else was out there playing, golf with him? Lindsey Graham. So, of course, Graham now feels that he's getting his control over Trump's foreign policy, especially as regards Ukraine, and probably the
Yeah,
Middle East as well. Hey, where's Trump? Where's Waldo? I mean, we haven't seen hide or hair of him since all this stuff blew up in Istanbul and all that. I mean, this is a little off the topic here, but I think Trump is I think he came in with, especially on the Doge front, with a lot of sound and theories, a whole raft of executive orders. They obviously had those prepared and ready to go, more than I expected. But I think it's pretty clear that all it really did is come and stir the pot around a bit and slop some of the human material outside of the pot, but nothing that really made much difference. And now they're done. I don't see what else they can
yeah.
do.
And as somebody else recently pointed out, was it Matt Van Swol he said, "Lindsey Graham has been to Ukraine 9 times, but he's never come to the Western Carolinas after Hurricane Helene
Hmm.
once."
Well, those people in South Carolina keep electing him, though, don't they?
Oh, yeah,
What's the deal with that?
and I think he was referring more to Western North Carolina, but,
Yeah,
it's the same thing.
yeah.
You care more about people in that's it's really wild how many foreign trips these guys are taking. It's, uh so that's, and I don't know if I think sometimes it's maybe just because these are nonprofit or because so many the government is a nonprofit, so nobody really loses if the country does go bankrupt. It still happens that way in private business. "Oh, I'm gonna lose everything if the company goes out of business," but it's not that way in the government. It's, uh, if anybody wanted to try to cut all this, what would they do? I mean, Reagan I don't know if Reagan tried, but Reagan certainly didn't fail, and, when was the last time I mean, we'd really have to go back to the 20s to find the last time this was successful.
I suppose so, and I suppose there was something like, a constitutional system with some integrity to it that existed back then, but, we're talking about 100 years ago, Chris. I mean, that's a
Yes.
long time ago, and in terms of, the look, the way of the world is that human institutions do not endure forever. Sometimes they fail immediately, sometimes years, sometimes if they're in good shape, they can last for decades, sometimes even centuries. But, I mean, for a republic, 250 years, that's not a bad run. And, once things become so thoroughly corrupt that they simply can't be fixed, I don't think there's much point in crying over spilt red ink. I mean, it's just the way it is. It isn't gonna get fixed. It can't look, it was probably too late when Trump became president back in 2017, the first time. And even if he had been the kind of man who actually would have had the strategic vision and the integrity to fix the system, he probably couldn't have done it even then, looking at it in hindsight. Now, I think it's way, way too late. Trillions and trillions of dollars late, and or what is it? The days late and dollars short. I mean, it just isn't going to happen. Theoretically, if somebody wanted to come in with, 500 special agents, lawyers and accountants and parachute them into Langley and take over whatever the hell the CIA has been doing all these years and do the same thing with other government agencies, which maybe what was Doge was intended to do. You could probably grab this thing, may possibly grab this thing by the scruff of the neck and make it pull its horns back. But you have to also couple that with frankly, a reign of terror against Congress, like arresting dozens of congressmen and senators and prosecuting them for various corruption, and scare them into repealing and all these authorizations that these agencies rely on. What are the chances of that? In fact, has Trump even sent one major piece of legislation to Capitol Hill, except for his big, beautiful bill that's going to blow up the spending beyond anything we've ever seen with his $1 trillion military budget? I don't even call it defense because that's nothing to do with defense. It's all about power projection. I just don't think it's possible. I just don't think it's possible.
I don't think it's possible either, Jim, and, at least I've often said too that I really think the Rubicon was 11 September 2001.
I think it was one of many Rubicons. I tend to think of one Rubicon was Appomattox in 1865. Another one
Yeah.
was, whatever happened in the course of World War II, and then the growth of the national security state that took place in the 1950s. I mean, remember, even then in the 1950s, there was a bit of a pushback between, say, Robert Taft and the people who wanted to shrink the size of the wartime government, and those who wanted to take it on a new crusade against communism that was championed actually by William F. Buckley and National Review, which also had strong CIA connections. We know how that went. We basically decided to
Yes.
double down on the Cold War and grow the national security state. And remember, a lot of the domestic growth also was connected to those years. We didn't just have to build highways, they were national defense highways. You
Yes,
know,
they were.
so everything was, for national defense, even though it had nothing to do with national defense, but it was taken as a justification for any and every growth of the federal government in every area of American life. And once you reach that critical mass and it's all dovetailed with all these big corporations, it becomes something, ironically, very much like the Soviet system, where there's a total unity between the government and economic activity. And the only difference is that, they had one party and we have two parties, basically the same party with two factions, with a sort of a shadow boxing, Punch and Judy show of competition. Um,
Yeah.
that's all we got really at this point.
Well, they also called it the National Defense Education Act, but yes, you're right, that
Oh,
was
yeah.
all of
Sure.
those things were we have to fund all these things in the name of national defense. It was one of those things that, we had to defend our way of life, and I it's funny too, even looking at World War II, by our mere participation in the war, it was amazing how much we lost our country just because of that war.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
I actually I read in US News and World Report years ago that actually said that World War II created more lasting bureaucracies than the New Deal did.
I think that's probably right, and because after all, the New Deal was very close to a failure by the time the war started. I mean,
Yeah.
Roosevelt was not reinvigorating the economy. He needed that war. He was, uh, desperate to get us into a war. He tried everything possible to get us into a war, and all sorts of, shenanigans he staged on the high seas trying to provoke the Germans into shooting, and they wouldn't take the bait. But he finally did manage to bait the Japanese into attacking us so he could say, "Great, now I got my war."
Yeah, he got his war. Yeah, it was a yeah, there was never any illusion of neutrality there. But
Well,
unfortunately that
and of course, remember, you might say we even had a previous run at that under Woodrow Wilson because the
yes, we
government
did.
greatly under Wilson during World War One. But you're right, at least in the 20s, there was some cutting back on that, which was something we've never seen since and probably will never see again.
Looking at the 20s, isn't it always revealing when these academics and professors reveal their list of worst presidents?
Yeah.
Who's at the top of that list? Warren Harding for
Yeah.
2 years, and I always say, really, the biggest sin Harding committed was he appointed 4 Supreme Court justices.
Mhm.
They've never forgiven him for that, especially,
Mhm. Yeah.
because it was interesting too that you had a very short presidency, but for whatever reason had 4 Supreme Court justices.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jim, that is one thing to ask. Let's say, granted, this isn't going to happen either, but there suddenly among all academia in America, there is a free market revolution there, and every college professor becomes, laissez-faire capitalist or even an anarcho-capitalist. Would that change things?
Well, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride, right? Let's suppose it happened. Well, first off, I suppose if it were to have any impact, it would take decades for those kids who are being educated to grow up and sort of work their way into the institutions that are the antithesis of the ideas that
Yes.
they've been taught, and that somehow, again, so like maybe like burrowing into the Soviet system from the inside, they can bring it down. I don't know how that would work exactly, or if that could work. But I don't know how just having people with those ideas would actually change the structures and the institutions themselves, which are powerful and established and entrenched. And again, unless you're going to start repealing a lot of legislation, again, back to this kind of almost artificial distinction nowadays between public and private when there really isn't much a dividing line between them anymore, at least at the top level. How do you break up all these big corporations that essentially control the government?
Yeah, I don't know if you I don't know, yeah, I don't know what you can do there. There's a large it's very interesting, I often say, I think, you go back 70 years, you might have had a case where some of the businessmen really were
Sure.
dedicated to free markets, but I don't know if there's anybody super rich who's dedicated that. I remember the one leading business figure I can think of who came out against the coronavirus nonsense was David Neilman, and that was the guy who
Mhm.
founded JetBlue,
Mhm, mhm.
the airline, and he's the only person I can think of who had it, and he's certainly not as big as some of these. I don't think he's a billionaire. I think he's maybe, over 100 million, but I don't none of these billionaires really were speaking out against this. "Hey, you're destroying businesses. This isn't good for America." None of them said that.
Well, of course, it wasn't their business that was being
Yes.
destroyed, and that's the other big problem too, is that, when these corporations are big enough, they become these self-perpetuating empires,
Yeah.
and they do take over, the functions of government. Again, that's a distinction just doesn't exist anymore. Even, in a sense, yeah, they are free market laissez-faire capitalists for themselves, and part of their free market behavior is to take over the government that is relevant to their business interests.
But
Um, just being free market laissez-faire, doesn't necessarily translate into, an equal playing field in the economic sector. You're gonna use your economic power to gain governmental power that will help then crush your small competitors. As you know, one of the things during COVID was all the small businesses that shut down in
Yeah,
favor of big corporations.
yeah, Jim, and of course, even in our country, even being big doesn't necessarily mean you're invincible. I mean, look at what happened to, say, Sears or
Mhm.
FW Woolworth or the Great
Yeah.
Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company,
Mhm.
A&P. I
That's
mean,
true.
those those companies were huge.
Yeah.
And if you're in your 20s, you don't realize how big they were at one time. But things still do come and go. But sometimes I think maybe the people in charge just pick the winners and losers. Yeah, COVID also made me. I know we're going a little off the government topic. COVID also made me realize something else. I think about the big corporate welfare
Mhm.
status. I don't think they want to take away from the poor people because the poor people don't. It's almost as if the billionaires want to take away from the rest of the people who are in the top 10%.
Wait, say that again?
The rest of the people are in the top 10%.
How do you
That
mean?
it well, would you rather steal from somebody who has $1,000 in the bank or say somebody who has
Yeah, yeah,
$2,000,000 in the
yeah,
bank?
yeah, I see
I
that.
mean, it's a lot. I get a lot more money if I mean, somebody has $1,000 in the bank, I'd have to rob 2,000 of those people to or as opposed to taking everything from somebody who's got 2,000,000 in the bank, it's
Well, you see that reflected, whenever the, Republicans and the Democrats do their shadow boxing over tax rates, and they argue about what should be the top income tax rate. Um, now who pays income tax? Let's say pays big amounts into the income tax. It's essentially the upper middle class or the lower upper class, people making, a few $100,000 a year, maybe if they're lucky, $1 million a year or $2 million a year. They pay income tax, but the guys who are earning, if you want to call it earning, 50 or 100 million or $200 million a year on investments, they're not paying income tax. They don't pay. They're not paying income tax on wages, salary, and tip. They're paying it on investment and other forms of income that pay much lower rates. You notice nobody ever talks about that.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases too, you might have your investments and things sheltered in IRAs or
Exactly. Yeah.
things
Yeah.
like that. It's,
Mhm.
Buffett, I think uses insurance as a way to protect things.
Well, and not only that, a lot of what they're gonna do is basically they're gonna benefit off of, activities of the corporations that they head that are not even their private asset at all. This again, is like the socialist model. I mean, how much personal income did Leonid Brezhnev have? Not a whole lot, I expect, but I don't think he minded.
Yeah. Just recently too, I don't know, there was that guy who was president of Uruguay died, and he still drive like an old Volkswagen and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Uh, I should point out some of my friends who really, really cover Milei, they pointed out that guy was horrible because when Maduro was running tanks over people in Venezuela, he apparently said they should get out of the way. So, but anyway, Jim, what would do you think something like yeah, I only say I think we could have been saved in 2000 or so is because we still did have budget surpluses. I mean, to get back to budget surpluses, number one, I don't know how we can do that without a massive just cutting 90% of the military.
Or yeah, or at least half of it or something below that. 90% would be fine. But I mean, because after all, if we're spending $1 trillion, 90% would be $100 million, which is still, I think, more than what the Russians have in their military budget. So, it- yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think, but let's face it. That's not the biggest part of the economy of the
Yes.
government spending either. It's the entitlements, and of course now it's service on the debt, and service on the debt is going to be overwhelming everything. And of course, that's something that all the big financial institutions have an interest in, because to whom is the debt owed?
It's owed to these banks, yeah, and who's holding most of the IOUs? Is it the
Mm.
Chinese or is it
Well, that's the other problem, and that's one of our big vulnerabilities. Again, I'm not a finance guy, so I can't tell you all the details of this, but I mean, what did they used to say? If I owe you $1,000, I've got a problem. If I owe you $10 million, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the situation where our creditors are in too, as well as, Chinese, Japanese, whoever else is holding all these, government bonds. Yeah, we have a problem, but so do they, and I don't know how that works out.
Yeah, there's definitely a problem. I mean, it seems like to me they wanna try to, get more people to use the dollar to which might, indirectly at least, which might be a way of fighting the inflation, but I'm really starting to worry that we might be getting to that point, where I don't know if it's ever going to go away, and the sad truth is, even if you were alive in the '70s, I don't think Americans really know what horrible inflation really looks like.
No, no.
Not like compared to some of these, where you go into a restaurant on Sunday, and then you go into a restaurant Saturday, and they've raised all their prices 50%.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. Assuming people can afford to eat at restaurants at all, but we're talking about the price of eggs or milk or something else that people have out there. Um, yeah, I don't really know. Of course, what's Trump's approach to threaten people? If they a BRICS start a currency, we're gonna put 100% tariffs on them or whatever it is, to defend our marvelous dollar or whatever it is, that he says he's gonna do. Um, that's again, that doesn't sound like much of a strategy to me, but and that also relates to one of the reasons I think we have this huge bloated thing, going back to what we said about, the post World War II era and the growth of a national security state. I don't see any indication that Trump wants to dismantle that national security state. The idea of the pursuit of global hegemony, like I said, $1 trillion military budget. He's trying to preserve it all, even expand it. And, how do you do that without also expanding the power of the state? I mean, now we've got what, we talked about it earlier. You're gonna turn all the private data over to Palantir. He's gonna have the Justice Department out there, on a witch hunt for anybody who's accused of antisemitism. I mean, this just get this is if Trump was gonna come in and restore liberty, this is not what it looks like.
Yes, that's another but that's one thing I knew was I feared naturally would happen is that he would figure out some way to go after all these anybody who disagrees with Israel because that's been one consistent position he's had for
Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
always been in their back pockets.
Well, it's also the flip side of when a lot of people on the, say, the pro-liberty side of America saying, "Oh, cancel culture is bad," and having all these woke standards and they're getting people
Yeah.
fired and all that because they said the wrong thing for the wrong gender or whatever. Okay, so now we're gonna have what passes for right-wing cancel culture and, thought police and hate crimes, or hate speech. I mean, it's the same thing except the content is shifted a little bit differently.
Yeah, as somebody who was old enough to remember when the right wing wanted to cancel Ozzy Osbourne and even Bart Simpson in the early days, I've never trusted the conservatives in the issue of censorship. It's,
Yeah, remember the famous wardrobe malfunction at the Super Bowl, and so many people got up on the supposed right, got up on their high horse over, somebody might flash a nipple on TV or something, and the whole world is gonna come crashing down. That's I'm pro nipple myself. I mean, I don't think that's our biggest problem in the world, and now everything is, all sorts of perverse propaganda that, nobody bats an eye about, and, I think
yeah.
that train left the station a long time ago too.
Yeah, there's definitely something. I mean, uh, if let's imagine there was an entire clean sweep of Congress tomorrow. How much of
Yeah.
a difference would that make?
Uh
And everybody was, a Thomas Massey or a, yep,
When I would well, you're saying they'd all be replaced by Thomas Massie? Well, then I guess God is in his heaven and all's
mad,
right
yeah,
with the world. Yeah, I can just,
yeah,
please don't tempt my poor heart by imagining such a wonderful outcome if such a thing were to happen. But if you simply just clear out the scoundrels we have now and replace them with other scoundrels, how is that gonna matter much?
yeah,
My first posting in the State Department was in Mexico, and one of the, rules of the Mexican Revolution was no reelection. Nobody can ever succeed himself in the same office because that's how Porfirio Diaz kept himself in power for years and years. And every document said at the bottom, "Sufragio efectivo, no reelección." Effective suffrage, no reelection. So what all that meant is that a whole line of scoundrels had their chance at the trough. You know, first my turn, I loot it. Now it's your turn. You loot it. Now it's your turn. Now you loot it.
Yeah, Texas actually had this situation, too, where, a husband and then a wife was governor. I mean, I I believe they called themselves Ma and Pa Ferguson. It was so it was yeah,
It
but that
sounds all
was
very homey.
yeah, but that was the whole thing. You just get and the Kirchners in Argentina did that as well.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's it's it. So what does fix this? I mean, I guess the question is, what does the collapse looks like when it's happened, and how does it collapse, or can we really predict that? Because
I
I
I
don't really think it can be fixed either.
no, I don't think so. I and in terms of what the collapse looks like, whether it's something sudden or there's something that is fairly gradual and then picks up steam at a certain point, I'm guessing that, in the absence of a major war, and that can't be ruled out either, in the absence of a major war, it would start with some kind of a financial collapse. Again, I don't know too much about finance. I understand the bond market in Japan is very precarious, and that that could be the thread that unravels the sweater if that starts, and how quickly that would go. But I think when all's said and done, finance is just numbers on digital impulse or pieces of paper or something. At some point, the financial run, if it starts, then becomes has economic consequences. That's when you see supply chains drying up, empty shelves in stores, and that's when things probably start getting kinetic, as they say. When people don't know where their next meal's coming from, what happens when food trucks, grocery store stocking trucks don't show up at the grocery store in cities for a couple of weeks. That's what we don't know the answer to.
That is yeah, that's also what we don't know the answer to, Jim, and unlike, say, the era of the Depression,
Mhm.
we've got a lot of Americans who absolutely could not go back to something like subsistence farming or anything like that.
No, no, and have no place to go to. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, to tell you honestly, one of the reasons I live where I am now in a remote area of Virginia is because I was in Serbia in, December of 2021, I think, and I went out to a village, and there's people that, they're curing their own hams and distilling their own rakia, and basically, I say to myself, if I was in Belgrade and everything fell apart, I would just go back to my village. And there are people there that are related to me. There's houses because, people have left for the city long ago, and the places are empty, and there's food there, and you'll survive. And I think, in America, nobody has a village, so I figure I better go start one. So basically, I'm living on a big property, a lot of land, trying to grow some things. I got some chickens with eggs, and a lot of guns, a lot of ammunition. And I hope that whatever happens, at least me and my extended family and people that I know will have a safe refuge if and when the time comes. Maybe that turns out being a stupid precaution. I don't know. Maybe, we could just keep kicking the can down the roads until long after I've assumed room temperature, but I don't know.
I've often said that, the prepper mentality, but sometimes I think the one thing about the prepper mentality is you have all this stuff in one place and you kind of make yourself so you can't move easily. But
Yeah.
then what happens if you have to get up? Sometimes I think it's better to just be ready where I can be like the soldier and I can pack my bags in 3 hours and be out
Oh,
and
yeah.
bug out.
Well, a lot of people in the cities now have bug out bags, but I assume that presumes they have someplace they're gonna bug out too.
Yeah.
And also some some way that they could have at least some reasonable hope they can get there. I mean, again, what if happens if we're a situation where everything's falling apart? Oh, yeah, and, nobody has gasoline for their cars and no other transportation is working. What do you do then?
Yeah, Jim, that's what happened in India in 2020.
Mhm, yeah.
Modi not only shut down the economy, but he shut down all the public transportation.
Was this during that big cash seizure that he did?
I don't know, but I mean, literally, these people all decided, "I wanna go back to my hometown,"
Yeah,
but then there was no way to get
yeah,
back there other than
yeah.
just walking.
Yeah, I think what triggered that was for I don't know what the hell I think it was supposed to be against, tax cheating or something like that.
Well, it was the whole corona it was the big bad virus, Jim.
Well, no, but they also did something. I know it was that, but there was also you're right about that episode, but there was something he did earlier where I think they basically were concerned that people were, hoarding money and not paying taxes, so they they responded to that by simply abolishing the legal values of all bills above a certain denomination. So, basically, people's wealth that they had in cash was disappearing on them.
Oh,
No, that
so
that
so it'd
that
be
makes
it'd be
perfect sense. I mean, it would just take a meat axe to them, you know?
so it'd be like if you said all the $100 bills and $50 bills are worthless.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's right. Nothing more than a 20 is worth anything.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
anybody will say
that
that
would be nuts, yeah, and
yeah. Well,
I
that's
don't
the
know if we've got people who still do that, but, there certainly were people who lived through the depression and then never trusted the banks again. They'd
no.
get a safe or put it in some hole in the ground outside.
Well, I remember what was one of the first things that, Roosevelt did when he came in?
Oh, he
He
went and seized the gold, yes.
exactly, yeah, that's right. Now, if they were gonna seize gold today, I don't think as many Americans today own gold, although I think a lot of them do. I think if they they were told, "Oh, you must by law turn your gold in exchange for currency," back then, a lot most Americans may be a little more trusting of the government than they are now. I don't think too many people would do it. How do they seize their crypto? I mean, maybe they have some way they can do it. I don't know what it is.
Crypto is an interesting case because I think a lot of people are, of people who are doing self-custody, it will be tough, but the people who aren't doing
Well,
self-custody, I
exchanges,
mean
yeah, yeah.
and there's a lot of people who aren't I don't know where self-custody is gonna go in the world of crypto. I mean, I know a lot of Bitcoin holders and other people, and I suspect if they dropped dead right now,
Mhm.
probably at least one-fourth of them, that nobody would be able to get to their crypto.
Yeah, yeah.
So their families or whoever, I mean, if I mean, I know, for example, if I drop dead right now, my family can probably get to my various accounts and stuff, and they'll have to obviously show documentation that they are who they are, but it's not that way with crypto, but and I don't know and you also hear stories of, uh, somebody took over a guy's phone, somebody get kidnapped and like, "Hey, give us your seed phrase or we'll kill you," that kind of thing, so
Oh, there's like, what, 24 words that,
yeah,
have
12
to be
words,
something.
24 words, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a very complicated thing,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, and this is not financial advice, not legal advice, not tax advice, not
No,
immigration advice, but
certainly isn't.
yeah, so yeah, and Jim, I do wonder what this is going to look like because, as I've said several times, if we get to a place where it's a civil war or something, I think if you're in the cities, it may be a point where you're not gonna have any food.
No,
Some of
no,
these cities,
you're
that
no
will
food, you're screwed, yeah.
and that's one thing that'd be interesting too about the divide of the country is I don't know if there's ever been a civil war or anything like that where there's been on one side, you have people who don't grow food, don't make the clothes,
Mhm.
don't even do things like
Yeah,
plumbing and housing
mhm.
maintenance,
Yeah.
and I guess in some ways I kind of welcome it because I think it would shake things up really fast. But
Yeah, well, it's well, let me put it this way, if it does if things do collapse and then on the ground it does get kinetic, it's not gonna look like 1861 with neat lines of boys in blue and gray shooting at each other. It's gonna look more like, Lebanon or Bosnia or something like that. It will be
yeah,
house by house, block by block, us guys against them guys over there, whoever they is, and, it's not gonna be pretty.
yeah, it won't be pretty, but at the same and I gotta ask you, I mean, if you're betting on Kyle Rittenhouse versus David Hogg, that's pretty much a no-brainer.
Um, yeah, that's true, although whatever is left of the government would be on David Hogg's side.
Yeah, yeah, if they have anything left,
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, we still have that here to a certain extent, Jim. I'm glad Rittenhouse got acquitted, Daniel Penny in New York was acquitted, thank
Well, I
goodness.
mean, like, think of it in terms of, like, the Russian Civil War. One of the things the Reds had to do was to because they control the cities, is go out in the countryside and seize food, from, the farmers, the peasantry. and, they had some, pretty hard-nosed, vicious people that were capable of doing that. I'm not sure that our government could do that armed with a bunch of, you know, women and trannies and foreigners. I mean,
Yeah,
but on the other hand, I could also see a circumstance where a lot of red-blooded, capable Americans would be, duped into serving that purpose because they'll be told, "Oh, yeah, those people out there, they're agents of the Russians or the Chinese or whoever it is, and you've got to do this to defend America." And they're anti-Semites too. So, I don't know there would be a lot of, confusion as to who is who and what is what, when that time comes, if it comes.
and if something like that happens, there's no doubt that other countries will be sticking their nose into it. Certainly Russia and China will. I mean, I don't know
I
if they're not doing it already right
I
now.
I I I blame Canada. Blame Canada.
Yeah, I but I do think I mean, I think if Europe would just have, the same kind of gun rights as they have here, I think a lot of the disorder there would go away. It would just take a few Kyle Rittenhouse incidents against some of these terrorists over there, and the rest of them would all calm down really fast.
Yeah, I do think it does have a chilling effect on how overt and direct the government would tend to be in some of these things where, you're right. In Europe, nobody has to, no, person in a position of authority has to worry about getting shot if he overplays his hand. Here, I think it does have a little bit of a chilling effect on that kind of behavior.
Yeah, and I always, talk about how the fact that America very rarely is there's never a burglary when the people are at home.
No.
Occupied pe Burglaries happen when people are at home all the time in Europe.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's a big factor, but, certainly it's uh, if you were let's imagine Jim Jatras was made president or even made president with emergency powers, what would you do, Jim?
Resign immediately. What would I do? I
And
mean,
you've got
yeah, yeah.
you've got 8 years too.
All right. What I would do is start with, as I say, I would first have to get control of the federal government, which means you'd have to essentially seize control of all the leadership of these uh, agencies, especially the national security agencies, and make sure you were running them and knew what they'd been doing. Again, I don't think the president has any effective control over these agencies, and even if he did, it probably wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing. Secondly, you notice one thing that Trump has not done is, whatever he thinks he's doing with these tariffs and so on and so forth. Um, he doesn't explain anything to anybody. He just sort of says, "Oh, let's just raise the tariffs, and I guess domestic manufacturing will come back like, just mushrooms after the rain automatically." Doesn't work that way. What I would do is, go on national TV, internet, everything else, social media, and propose a well thought out program for restructuring the American government away from foreign adventurism, pull out of NATO, pull out of all of our foreign alliances, cut a deal. Some people say Trump wants to do that, but he's not going to cut a deal with the Russians and the Chinese and maybe other powers, saying we have no interest in this part of the world. That's your problem over there. In the Pacific, pull back past the second or third island chain and concede everything west of that to the Chinese. Do something similar in Eastern Europe. Cut the defense budget, excuse me, military budget way, way down, at least by half, maybe two-thirds, maybe down 90%, like you say. Concentrate solely on the territorial defense of the United States. Take all of that money, well, first off, give a lot of it back to the people. Again, on tax policy, look, I'm an old Pat Buchanan guy. I'm in favor of tariffs. I know tariffs are a tax and all that nonsense, but you have to have a tax somewhere. But I'd rather have a tax that is voluntary, that people pay if they choose to buy that product, rather than a tax that's mandated on everybody and say, "Look, I want a tax bill that either institutes a national sales tax, not a VAT, but like a retail tax that is across the board, or even better, a tariff, and abolish all the other taxes. Get rid of income tax and stuff. Now, what you do about entitlements, I don't know. I have to
Yeah.
think I went through. But the other one is, and I know a lot of libertarians would not like this, but I would say all that money, or at least some of that money we're spending on defense, let's have a national infrastructure program. I mean, again, why we don't have any high speed rail in this country. Our roads and our bridges and our airports are a disgrace compared to what other countries, especially China, are doing. Um, and let's take that money and even maybe reorient some of those corporations that are dependent on this kind of military spending and saying, look, for a certain period of time, you will get sort of a cut of the pie to shift your program back to domestic production rather than into something that's basically economically useless, like military spending. But anyways, to have some kind of a idea of how to restructure the whole shebang, tell people what it is, and then put some heat on Congress to pass the damn thing. I guess that's what sort of comes to mind.
Tariffs are certainly one of the lesser of the evils of taxation.
Well, what kind of taxes would you like? I know you don't like taxes, but you have to have taxes of some sort. What taxes would you like? Not income tax. I think that's the worst thing in the world because it says to the government, you get to micromanage the whole economy by adjusting the tax rates on
Yeah,
various things.
the income tax is absolutely horrible.
It's an abomination. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, tariffs,
Well,
yeah,
if you looked how the government was funded before, they enacted the amendment that allowed direct taxation, the income tax, it was tariffs and luxury taxes, especially on liquor. That's why the prohibitionists
yes.
made a deal with the progressives to enact the income tax so that they could replace the revenues on liquor with income taxes.
Yeah, and that shows the danger of, we'll swap one tax for another, and
Yeah, yeah.
eventually the other tax comes back anyway. But, yeah, it's, certainly yeah, I don't know after what you do after tariffs, it's, I really don't know where you go from there. I
Well,
mean,
there's some people propose what they call the fair tax. I mean, look, in a lot of states, they have,
the sales tax, yeah.
retail taxes, which means, okay, you pay X percent on every product you buy, and I could see, okay, that's a regressive tax that would hit the poor hardest. I could see where you would say, okay, fine, every American citizen would have, up to $20,000, say, tax-free on the retail tax.
Yeah.
And after that, the more you buy, the more tax you pay, but after that, it's up to you. If you don't buy, you don't pay.
Yeah, I don't know what you do with that. It's,
Yeah,
I absolutely think you have to cut spending before you start thinking about taxes.
and that's where I don't again, definitely on the military, I don't know what you do with entitlements. I mean, I once those things are locked in and so many people are dependent on those, you can say, "Well, privatize Social Security." That just means you'll have a bunch of corporate scoundrels enriching themselves on the program rather than bureaucratic scoundrels.
And people make decisions and make plans based
Yeah,
on certain
yeah,
things. I
yeah,
mean, my brother, who was actually a postal worker for many years, and he absolutely hated Obama because
yeah.
eventually he was faced with the ultimatum of, "I can either collect my postal pension or collect my Social Security,"
Right.
and that wasn't the deal when he retired. He paid into that pension and paid into Social Security,
Yeah, yeah,
and
exactly.
so, that's I don't wanna, take away things that people absolutely paid into. I mean, Jose Pineda of Chile would have a model on this, but otherwise, I don't know how you work this out. It's then these are and I guess this is part of the problem. You should never do anything that's very hard to back out of.
Yeah, yeah,
And yet
exactly.
you create these government programs and it's like, well, how do we if they don't work, how do we get out of them? It's like, well, we
Yeah.
can't get out of them.
Yeah, and now, of course, you look at something like health insurance, which is a highly regulated industry, and again, any regulated industry is gonna benefit the corporations that operate in that industry.
Yeah.
So all these healthcare companies are huge bureaucracies working hand in glove with the government, and you sort of wonder why, say, something like car insurance is not particularly expensive or difficult compared to, say, health insurance. So if you had a freer market in health insurance, it probably would be more efficient in some ways. But then you have the problem, well, what do you do with indigents? What do you do with people who simply don't have the money to pay for health insurance? I suppose you could have a system where when you go to the emergency room for treatment, if you accept the treatment, you're then basically accepting that you're buying into a certain plan. I don't know how you enforce that though.
Well, one of the differences, I don't have car insurance for my
Yeah.
oil changes. I don't have car insurance to replace a tire that might have a hole punched in it. I don't have car insurance for a tail light that needs
Yeah, but
replaced.
you want liability insurance,
I
so you
have I
yeah,
have I haven't I mean, car insurance is designed for catastrophic
yeah,
expenses, and
exactly, yeah,
catastrophic expense, you could say would be something like, "Well, that's gonna be 1 month of my paycheck,"
yeah.
or 2, or maybe for some people, catastrophic is
Or
2 or
or
3.
or 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 also liability that if,
Yeah,
you're in an accident, you don't
yeah.
wanna be on the hook for millions of dollars and for somebody who was injured or killed, you know?
Yeah, health insurance doesn't work that because I can remember going into State Farm and they would actually look at my car and say, this, and they would cut me a check, and then I would go to whoever I could find and
Yeah,
pay them to do the work, and
yeah,
I might end up making a profit off that.
yeah, sure.
Health insurance doesn't work
Mm.
health insurance does not work that way. If health insurance did work that way,
But car
then I
insurance
mean
is a relatively, um, uh, less regulated industry than health insurance
yeah,
is. But then again, with car insurance, you do have people obviously who, can't afford the insurance and sort of drive naked, hoping for the best. That's a
oh,
little
yeah,
harder to do when there's obligation. If somebody goes to the emergency room and they're sick or injured, they have to be treated and somebody has to pay
yeah.
for and, so you have to sort of figure that problem out. But, again, it seems to me it should not be an insoluble problem. But in terms of things like, Social Security and other, benefits, and of course, then you get out of the bigger stuff like social, what is it called? Supplemental security income, things like that. A lot of people who are just up for economic reasons on various forms of what used to be called welfare. I don't know how you rein all that in.
I don't know either, and the worst thing about a lot of these programs, so much of it just seems to be you didn't say much. What do you think about some of the cuts to USA? Did that has that accomplished anything? Has there been any good news to come out of the Trump administration in your view?
I don't know how much cutting there's really been, to tell the truth. There's certainly been a reorganization. I can remember back when I was in the Senate, Jesse Helms from North Carolina was really, really big when he was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of forcing the United States Information Agency under the arm of the State Department instead of being an independent agency. But once it did, it was just basically carried on like it did before. So as far as I know, USAID has simply been put under the umbrella of the State Department. I don't know that the programs themselves have actually been cut back that much, if at all.
I really don't know either. It's Jim, it's funny the way the left and even people in the center would propagandize under Reagan. He's cut this, he cut that, and when you go back and look at the grand scheme of things,
Yeah.
Uh, as Murray Rothbard pointed out, the one thing that died while Ronald Reagan was president was the 55-mile-per-hour speed limit.
eh,
Uh,
Good. I give him credit for that.
yeah, it's one thing I remember that was part of a transportation bill that he actually vetoed, and they passed it over him. But it was really, but if you think about it, that was the what other government, and then some of these got escalated. As much as people want to get on Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
The death of the Civil Aeronautics Board was really the last time anybody they literally just took a government agency and said and put the agency before the firing squad and said, "You're out of here." It's
Yeah. Yeah.
they haven't done that since with any agency. And
No,
and Jimmy Carter created other things too, but
yeah. Usually just musical chairs, or they just change the titles and or the organizational structure of who's in charge of that agency. Um, Trying to think, there are some good things. I mean, I guess there's some good things coming out of the Justice Department with regard to immigration enforcement. I don't know how that much that's actually um,
yeah, well,
fitting into the numbers we're talking about, but and also, okay, Title IX, we're gonna have fewer men in women's sports, yay. But it's
yeah,
some of the woke excesses, the craziness is probably being reined in a little bit. I'm glad of that, but I'm not sure it makes that
yeah.
much difference.
I don't well, I don't know. The feds don't have that much of an impact on, sports, like high school sports is totally governed at the state level. It's, or almost all of it, and
Yeah, so
Another
college sports over almost every institution of higher education gets a lot of government money. So there's that. Now, maybe they shouldn't be getting government money, but what I heard one was that when they were going after Harvard, and they said this was going to jeopardize Harvard's 100, excuse me, $400 million a year they get from the federal government. I'm saying to myself, why the hell is Harvard University getting a hu $400 million a year in federal government money in the first place? I mean, much less cutting it off. I mean,
well,
you're talking about a hedge who is it? I think Ron Unz called it, what is it? A huge, massive hedge fund to start with.
yeah, that's something too, though. Harvard is so big and so large a corporation. I don't think there's anything you can really do to Harvard
No.
that would hurt Harvard. That's
But
with the endowments and all that
they'll
stuff.
they'll squeal like stuck pigs anyway if you
Yeah,
wanna cut off their government money, and, you look at that, they could they if they didn't charge tuition to go there,
yeah,
it wouldn't even be a rounding error in their
yeah,
budget, you know?
yeah. I mean, that's, but and that's, I do think there is finally an understanding in America is that, oh, look, a lot of this corruption is coming out of academia.
Mhm.
And that's something we've not changed. And even though a lot of people were calling it out, including Thomas Sowell was calling it out over 30 years ago. It's
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and only now is the public taking notice. So I and that was another thing too. I think if they'd had some real reform back in the 90s, maybe it could have been salvaged. But
yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
people just
yeah,
say to me, I want to see academia just collapse now because it can't be fixed.
yeah, yeah.
And there's all kinds of constitutional implications here. I mean, I don't. But Jim, also a lot of this too. It seems to me a lot of this is just because uh, all of these. I mean, if the attacks on 7 October 2023 don't happen, does anybody care about what academia is doing right now?
Probably not, probably
Yeah,
not, and again, I think you have to look at academia the same way we look at all these other interests, whether it's in finance or pharma or down the list, the military, that it's tempting sometimes to say, "Ooh, academia. Ooh, look, pharmaceutical. Oh, ooh, look,
yeah,
the militaries." What they're all one part of one big, mobile structure that's hanging there. You trim a little bit here and maybe the thing lopsides a little bit that way or the other way, but you're not really changing the thing itself because it's all one interconnected network.
yeah. But no, but as Matt Walsh has pointed out, nobody cared when academia was just demonizing
Mhm. Yeah,
American once.
yeah,
But
yeah.
then suddenly when people on the campuses were out protesting Israel, it was suddenly a problem.
Yeah, yeah, it is interesting too. It's, because, you look at the rhetoric, look, there are a lot of people from various parts of the political spectrum, protesting against Israel, but the ones on the left, they always have to make it, it's a white settler, apartheid, neo-colonial state. I mean, it has to sort of go into the anti-white, lexicon for people on the left. And,
Yeah,
for some of it, it's anti-Semitic. Some of them it is, pro-Muslim, kind of pro, Hamas kind of thing. It's all over the farm in terms of content, but it's interesting how the right does pick up on this as the one thing they're interested in.
yeah, yeah. Well, as one of my one person there points out, for a lot of these people on the left, whiteness actually means capitalism.
Yeah,
So so
yeah,
they
and
want
also also arithmetic. Arithmetic is white too.
yeah, so all these things that are whiteness, so
Yeah,
Israel represents capitalism, what they call capitalism,
right.
and this is why you see things like, you see like trans liberation and Palestinian liberation together, even though if the trans people went over to Palestine, they would be killed immediately. Because that's what for
Yeah,
them, the gender binary is also,
yeah.
comes from capitalism. It's really ridiculous, but I know some people are looking deep, and a lot of people on the right aren't aware of just how insidious some of this stuff is too.
Yeah, yeah. No.
Uh,
Look, especially it depends on where on the right they are. I mean, they're all over the farm too. Some of what passes for the right in this country are like, for example, evangelical Christian Zionists for whom the only thing that really matters in the world is Israel. And they're on the right somehow. I don't know how that's right or left or sideways.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate too, 'cause I jokingly tweeted last night, or maybe not jokingly tweeted, but I said, really ever since, all of our foreign policy has been designed to kill Christians in the Middle East,
Yeah, yeah. And
and that's basically what it's
doing a
doing.
mighty fine job of it too. I mean, look what
Yeah,
happened in Syria. All these years, we support, these Al Qaeda and ISIS-linked groups to overthrow Assad, and then almost the minute he's overthrown, you have Trump meeting with Joe Al-Jilani or Ashar or whatever his name is, that this Al Qaeda guy, who's now supposedly the leader in Syria. The American, embassy in Damascus is back open. We're lifting the sanctions. Well, like, I'm against sanctions. They never should have been put on in the first place. But now that we have a bunch of Al Qaeda guys in charge, hey, it's all copacetic. Those are a buzz.
yeah, we're fighting all these other side, and not to mention, Israel gave all those Israel traded all those weapons with Azerbaijan, who,
Yeah,
of course, is fighting the oldest Christian country in the world.
yeah.
And I don't know hardly any Christians who talk about what's been going on with Armenia. It's like
No,
they
no,
don't care.
no.
It's really, it's kind of amazing. I would have thought there would have been more Christian unity and stuff like that, but there isn't. I do think to a certain extent, having been raised Catholic, there is some unity among Catholics, but, you know,
Mhm.
don't hurt, these people are in a different country, but don't hurt but we're all Catholics, but
Yeah.
Christianity is a little more divided. Well, Jim, what do you think might happen in 2028? Do you think Vance will run for president or anybody else? Or
I think we have a long haul between it now and then. I
yeah,
mean, for goodness sake, I mean, Trump's not even 6 months into his term yet. First off, as I say, I think that we've already passed the high point in administration.
yeah,
Things are gonna deteriorate from now. His supposed peace efforts in Ukraine are falling apart. There's a big question mark whether we're gonna get into a war with Iran. I don't think they're quite ready for a war with China. Let's assume we get to uh, next year without a major war somewhere. I still think the chances are that Congress, at least one house, is going to flip. Maybe both of them. I don't know. The Senate
yeah.
always depends on the numbers and the cycle of one third of the seats. And the House of Reprehensibles, it's given how narrow the Republican margin is now, I'd be surprised if the Democrats didn't take it, which means we're probably looking at another impeachment scenario. There's a lot of sound and fury between now and then to predict what's gonna happen. I guess Vance would be the odds-on favorite going in if Trump still has credibility on the Republican side, at that point, which he probably will. I mean, let's face it, there are an awful lot of Trump supporters who think everything he says he does, he has done. Promises made, promises kept, and that they're probably a good 35% of the population, that nothing between now and then would ever be attributed to him as a failure. So whomever he anoints as his successor, and at this point it looks like would be Vance, would be the one that the Republicans would nominate.
In a way, yeah, I remember when Rothbard described, Reagan as this Teflon president.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing sticks to Trump either.
No.
I mean, I don't know how, he was the biggest promoter of Anthony Fauci in 2020, and that's been completely forgotten.
Yeah.
Not to mention all of these governors who who really were more responsible
Mhm.
for this,
Yeah.
reelected. I mean, when I saw, in 2022 here in Texas, I saw Greg Abbott get 2/3 of the vote in the primary.
Mhm.
I just thought, is there really any hope for these voters? You went out and reelected the worst governor in the history of Texas, simply by virtue of what happened in 2020,
Mhm.
and you it wasn't even close. I and the governor of Nevada, I think, was the only one who lost because of this.
Mm.
Uh, and there and so many other people who were elected didn't lose, anything because of all this. It's really remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, Michigan, voted for Trump, but they also reelected Whitmer, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what kind of sense does that make?
Yeah, Jim, I gotta say too, and this is one thing where I think conservatives are maybe not very practical, but I say to some of these religious conservatives, why would you ever want to stop Gretchen Whitmer from getting an abortion?
Uh, okay, we can leave that one on the table.
Yeah, it's like, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can leave that one on the table, I guess, but, yeah, it's yeah, that is true. That's one thing that I don't see people are necessarily partisan. It seems like they're just more loyal to the person, but
Yeah.
obviously there was a lot of people
Well,
who
in Trump's case, that's true. I mean,
yeah,
you've got, on the left or what I'm not sure left and right is really the division, but you certainly have a lot of people with Trump, derangement
yeah,
syndrome that hate him, hate him, hate him. He's Hitler. And then you have people on the other side who think he's the reincarnation of I don't know, Charlemagne
yeah,
and Napoleon and Jesus Christ all in one. I don't know.
and as time goes on, Jim, both sides get crazier.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's really wild to watch this. I mean, if y and, I think this is one of the things about democracy that and just that people don't understand. If you lo if and let's just take something innocuous. You lock one person who loves Coke and one person who loves Pepsi in a room for 6 hours, 90% of the time, they're gonna walk out of that room both being more convinced that their position is correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now sometimes it'll happen that some people change their mind, but most of the time, when people sit down and talk about their disagreements, they just become more sure that I'm right and he's
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, I don't think there's any consensus of values in America today. There's that big division you're talking about, and even within those 2 trends, they've got their divisions as well. And, I don't see putting that Humpty Dumpty back together again. There is no American people as such anymore. I mean,
yeah,
and unfortunately, I think there's kind of a racial component into it, in that, back to the thing about the white, white this, white that, whiteness,
yeah,
is that the left, or what we call the left nowadays, is really centered around a kind of the oppressor victim kind of a
yeah.
Marxist schematic, white, male, Christian, English speaking, et cetera, et cetera. That's the epitome of evil. That's the definition of evil. And the people on the other side are not necessarily conscious of that. In other words, they don't seem to realize they are hated for who they are. In other words, they just their attitudes tends to be more like, "Well, but we still live in the old America where everybody, we vote our democracy and all that stuff," and they're just not aware of the country they live in anymore.
I don't think they are, yeah, and I don't yeah. Uh, yeah, I'm very sick and tired of what I call victim culture. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
or as one person called it, the oppression Olympics and trying to see who's the most oppressed or just and that to me
yeah,
is
yeah,
I think a lot of people I think that's probably and I think that's a big factor in the rise of somebody like Andrew Tate, because
yeah,
it just, I do believe, that when people are truly victims of bad luck, it's great to help them. It's,
sure.
uh, I actually watched that movie, that old TV movie about Jessica McClure yesterday. If you remember the girl who fell down the well in Texas and got
Oh, yeah,
rescued,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and she was in that well for 58 hours. But everybody was paying attention to that in America. It said this was a time when America truly was unified because everyone's thinking, let's get her out of here.
So, Chris, that's the solution. We'll just throw more kids down wells.
I don't want to see that, but I do. Right? And from what I'm hearing, it looks like she's pretty much leading a normal life now,
Yeah, yeah,
which is great. But it's it's but that also is a time where you really see a lot of the good that exists in people because all these
yeah,
people are coming around
that's
trying to
true.
help. Some of them
Right,
have really crazy, crazy ideas, but they still have
sure,
their heart in the right place. It's
exactly.
so Jim, I got to ask too. Is I think Trump has maybe lost a few things. I mean, he's not to Biden level, maybe, but I think he's losing some of his self control and self discipline that maybe Trump isn't quite all there either. I think Biden was completely gone.
Yeah, yeah,
From day one.
good.
Uh, but Trump, maybe Trump will be gone too be completely gone mentally too. I don't know.
Yeah,
He,
that's
he- because when you get more to that state, it's kind of like like somebody who's drunk all the time. They don't censor themselves. It's
yeah.
yeah.
Well, supposedly he doesn't drink. Maybe he should take it up.
and as much as people wanna blame the media, I blame Joe Biden's family. You should not
Mm. Oh,
letting
I
your
sure should. Oh, yeah, yeah,
do
yeah.
that when it's like, "Dad, you can't be president." But anyway, well, Jim, I think we've covered. Is there anything else you wanna cover now? I think we've touched about all the bases here that we can touch.
No, I think we've covered pretty much everything. I just, I guess the only thing I would add is as grim as all this seems, I think we still need to try to be hopeful in one sense that, again, looking at things largely from a background in foreign affairs, I can't help but analogize to what the Soviet Union went through and Russia went through in the 1990s, and there is light on the other end. Unless we blow
Yeah,
ourselves up, there's light at the other end. I'm hopeful that some kind of an America can emerge at the other end of this pipeline. It might not be one unified country anymore. Maybe it would be better off if we're not one unified country anymore. But maybe it'll be more manageable in different parts. Um, but I'm hopeful that something can emerge at the on the other side that we would still be proud to say, yeah, that's my country. But I'm not so sure.
yeah, Jim, I will say I've been doing a lot of shows about Javier Milei, and I'm very
Mhm,
optimistic about what's happening there, and maybe that can be a model for the world. I don't even if America, the country dies, I don't think America, the idea, will die.
mm,
I do not. It will, and America is an idea, and when I say America is an idea, I think of Thomas Jefferson, truly great men who really did have a vision, and
mhm.
they were flawed men, but they really had a good intentions. I think they really, in some ways, would be amazed at some of the things we've accomplished. In other areas, they would be absolutely horrified. But I don't think that idea is going to go away.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll go in space. Maybe it'll, the Argentine Constitution was modeled after the American, so maybe it'll happen there. Maybe somebody else will start their own republic somewhere else. Where can we find you out there, Jim?
Best place to find me is on X or Twitter, whatever it's called, is at Jim Jatras. That's my only social media that I do. You'll find, I'm pretty active on there, and also the links to my book, I Tried to Warn You, which you can find on Amazon and
Yeah.
Barnes and Nobles, and from the printer Lulu.com.
Yeah, and rural Virginia is lovely, so I hope you go spend some good time out there. Once you get out of the Beltway and the
Yeah,
I-95, but get over into those other parts, it can be really beautiful. It's still very much like what you'd call the Old South.
yeah, yeah. Although
But
it's fading here too, as county I live in becomes more and more of a bedroom community for, Washington, the county changes itself too, the left gets stronger, they sort of, the drill.
yeah, well, okay. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. Go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. People are giving me money to buy me a coffee. Check out my Substack. I'm Chris Baker. Thank you, Jim Jatris. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.